So lovely. So first off, thank you to everyone who took the time to tune in to this really incredible, important, underlooked conversation in the community. And I'm so honored to have Maddie Krasno. She is an inspiration and such a force, and her courage just is very awe-inspiring. So I'm very excited that I get to facilitate this event for our honor, another great organization that I am very honored to be a part of. So that was not intentional. So yeah, just a brief intro to Maddie before I let her take it away. And of course, we will be having a few minutes at the end for questions and answers. So just Maddie, would you prefer Q&As at the end, or would you like them to just come in as is?
I mean, I'm really quite flexible. And I also, truthfully don't know like the amount of time that I've got for all of my, I don't just basically feel free to be like, Maddie, like this is where we're at in timing, or,
Okay.
whatever.
Yeah.
I'm super flexible.
Okay. In that case, I think you can go through your talk and then we can get to questions at the end. So so just a quick intro. Maddie is a former primate laboratory worker turned animal advocate, which is a very important story that I think I'm just very happy that we're having these kinds of conversations. And so Maddie previously worked at the infamous Harlow Primate Research Center during her undergraduate education at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And in fact, that was a huge part of shaping her advocacy to what it is today, her experience there, her motivations to working there, and her revelations while working there has really been a valuable learning experience for what the work that is being done now in animal advocacy. And after graduating from there, she went on to pursue her master's degree in humane education from the Institute for, was it the Institute of Humane Education? Yeah. And it was in collaboration with another university, correct?
Yeah, it's the Institute and then Valparaiso out of Indiana. Although now they're working with a different institution.
Okay, gotcha.
So for me, it was Valparaiso.
Yeah, so that's a good research to have for folks who are interested in doing humane education, for sure. So yeah, and since then, Maddie has gone on to work with several animal sanctuaries, a wildlife rehabilitation center, and different advocacy groups. And so I'm just really excited to have you here to talk about your journey, your stories, and also the two free speech lawsuits that you are currently a plaintiff on that are also related to animal testing that you will be talking about, and also address your personal experiences and what, based off of that, your overall vision for what it would look like for animal advocacy and rights and such organizations that really do care about the right and the freedom to exist free from harm, how such groups can form these important allyships and collaborations with people who work in industries that might not share that vision, but maybe, they're performing certain tasks against their will, and how they can feel not only safe coming out and speaking up about these issues, but also supported, and will remain safe and supported outside of just the whistleblower. Not that the protections there are, great either, but, there are a lot of services for different folks to come forward to address their concerns, but we don't, but we also want to see it in a more public front and show that solidarity, show that support, and ensure that people are not buying into industry propaganda of what activists and advocates and such organizations are, and feel that safety and support in coming forward. So I will stop yapping and I will let you take it away, Maddie. And
Thank you. I appreciate the introduction. It's great to be here. So I do have some slides that I'll share with you all. And yeah, as I said, just I guess I won't pay too much attention to the chat in the moment, and we'll wait for questions at the end, but feel free also to interrupt me. I'm very flexible. All right, so let's see here. Can y'all see that?
Looks good to me.
Looks good.
Yeah, if others can see, just give us a thumbs up in the chat.
Perfect. All right, so I'll assume that's a yes. All right, so I kind of have this presentation divided up into a few parts, just to try to kind of first share my story and then get into sort of what led to what, and ultimately sort of concluding with takeaways of some sort in terms of like what I'm hoping to see when it comes to, you know, building these relationships with people who worked in labs and also with activists. So anyway, we'll begin with my story, just so those of you who are not familiar with it have an idea of what got me into working in a primate lab in the first place. And so what got me into working in a lab is, believe it or not, my desire to work in primate conservation, and my inspiration being Jane Goodall. So this is a photo of me, Jane, who I'm sure you recognize, and my mother, who I'm pretty sure is on this call. Hi, Mom. So I actually took a course my freshman year of college called Animal Behavior, the Primates. And it was that course that kind of reinvigorated this feeling that I needed to work with animals. I had initially been avoiding studying anything related to the sciences because I was intimidated by it. So like if you were to study zoology, you had to take chemistry and physics and all of those things that are very intimidating. But when I took this course, I sort of got this feeling that I had to, follow what felt like a calling. The professor at the time was actually the director of Harlow Primate Lab, where I went on to work. So he was the one that was teaching this course that everyone loved, and that really kind of showcased all of the wonderful things about primates. And, somehow it never kind of translated to the harm that really takes place in primate research labs, like the one that he was directing. So I want to put all of this out here because I think one of the main things that especially the animal rights movement can struggle with is understanding how animal lovers can end up in a situation like this. And the reality is that many of us who go into to work in certain industries or just in certain places of animal exploitation are not going in there because we like animal exploitation. We actually are going in there because we love animals, and we might not know what the reality is of that industry or of, just that, place, whatever that place is. And for me, that was the reality. I knew very little about animal research. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. All I knew is that I wanted to work in primate conservation. There were primate labs on campus. What a great way to, get some experience right then as a student in college. So this little timeline, I was at Harlow Primate Lab from 2011 to 2013, a little over 2 years. So basically my junior and senior year of college, right? No, end of sophomore year to senior year of college. So basically it was end of freshman year that I took that class, came back my sophomore year and was basically just waiting to apply for a job, where I ended up being hired as a student caretaker. So this was a part-time position. typically about 10 to 15, well, yeah, 10 to 15 hours a week, give or take. We would work some hours during the week, but actually student caretakers were primarily responsible for the weekends. So there'd be like 4 or 5 of us at a time that were employed by the smaller primate lab. There's 2 of them on campus at Wisconsin. I was at the smaller lab with about 500 plus monkeys at any given time. And as the student caretakers, about 2 of us would take care of all 500 plus of these monkeys on the weekend. So we'd like basically take turns. That is when a lot of, you know, kind of things would happen that, you know, these are kind of like the story, the things that I remember really distinctly. Some of the stories that I will tell are things that would have happened on the weekend. But I just want to make this distinction because during the week we were technically like enrichment staff. So we were involved in, you know, trying to create things that would enrich the lives of these animals. So that might be things like distributing a quarter of an apple during the day. That could be enrichment. Some of it would be these plastic containers that we would stuff with like popcorn and cereal, and you know, you'd hook them to the animal's cage and then they could pick, like they'd try to pick that out while they were in the cage. It didn't usually take them very long, and this was only once a week. I mean, so enrichment, it was very scarce. It didn't occupy a lot of the time for these animals, so we were doing just kind of a lot of tasks around the lab during the week, and then the weekends was sort of when we were more closely working with these animals. This image that you're seeing is very similar to what I was seeing with these animals. Many were housed alone. Many were housed like what you're seeing here, but there might have been like 2 together without a divider. There was one room in the lab where I worked where there were groups of monkeys, but it was just basically like a giant cage. But it was just one room. So for the most part, many of these animals were living in what you're seeing here in this image. So I want to share just a couple of stories just as like sort of what would be like examples of memories that, you know, have changed me, have shaped me. I mean, there's so much I can say about the lab, and I could, you know, kind of go on and on, but I think that these are kind of representative of what has impacted me and led me to the conclusions that I've come to today. So, one of the animals that had a really big impact on me, I gave the name Cheerio to. And as you can see, there's actually an animal rights activist who goes by Compassion Over Cruelty on social media, recreated what I don't have any like photos from my experience. I never took pictures, I never took video. So there's memories that I have, and I've worked with artists to help them kind of bring that to life. And so with Cheerio, what happened is that he was a young macaque, probably around a year old. So young, but not an infant. And it was around New Year's one year, and New Year's was on a weekend. So during the week we had this monkey, and he was in our infirmary, which is basically like where monkeys can be more closely observed if they're having health issues, which he was. We didn't know what was going on with him, aside from the fact that basically the way the image you're seeing here is how he was. He had like no control over his limbs. He was kind of just like stuck, sort of barely moving around in his cage. And we couldn't figure out why, to the point that he could barely eat. And so what would end up happening is, to get him to eat, we'd actually be hand feeding him. And some of what we were feeding him were Cheerios. And this is very unusual. Rhesus monkeys are not a friendly species. They are not a species of monkey that I would recommend interacting with. They're dangerous. There's also, when you're in these labs, like these monkeys, they carry herpes B. This is a virus that is deadly to humans if they were to get it, which was terrifying. I've spoken with other lab workers who had the same fear I had, that, and, you know, a monkey had to be shedding the virus to even pass it, but you're always just kind of terrified because if you get it, you can die. So there's, I mean, they're not, you want to be careful with these animals is what I'm getting at. But with this individual, he was just so grateful to be fed, and there was so much life in his eyes that, you know, we were just, you know, trying to help him and figure out what was going on. But it didn't take long for them to decide that they couldn't figure out what was going on with him. And so it was decided that he would be euthanized. And so I was working that weekend, and so was one other student caretaker, and the vet came in, and me and this other student were asked to assist him. And so we had to take this, you know, individual into this small sterile room and put him on this table. And, you know, my coworker was asked to like secure one of his legs and arms, and I had one of the other arms, and the vet had the leg, which was all kind of ridiculous because he could barely move his limbs. I mean, it was like he didn't really need securing, but he had so much life in his eyes. It was like, I mean, this animal was still fighting. He was still like, I'm here. I just, you know, like there's got to be more that we can do. But in this industry, it's like, you know, they're not going to invest in this animal. And so I wasn't even securing him at that point. And I had, you know, when we're in these labs, we're all kind of scrubbed up, mask, like all of this garb and stuff. And to this day, I don't really know if my coworker could see that I was crying, because I was holding his hand and literally watching the light fade from his eyes. And it was just so disturbing to me that, you know, because of this animal's disability, he was considered, you know, useless, and his life was taken from him without basically a second thought, especially when, you know, I know that a sanctuary would have at least tried to work with him and, you know, tried to seek more vet care, more studies that a lab isn't going to do. You know, they're not going to invest in these animals. So that was Cheerio. And then one of the other individuals that has stuck with me, I call her the mother. And what happened with her is she was in the room where all of the where there were groups of monkeys. So this was really rare, but it was the one room where there were like maybe 6 larger cages, and there'd be like a bigger male who was the breeder male, and then maybe a few females or like younger males in that group. And so what happened was this was a weekend. I had gone in to do health checks and had discovered that she was carrying around her dead baby. And the baby was limp. I have no idea whether or not she gave birth to the baby and the baby was dead, or if the baby died. Either way, she was carrying this baby around. And so I had let my supervisor know, and she had said that she's still carrying the baby around tomorrow, Sunday. That me and my coworker should remove the baby from her. So the next day we went back, and sure enough, she was carrying this baby around still. And so it was decided that we had to figure out how to take this baby away. And one of the things I just think back to is how outrageous this was, that like the way we did this, we use like carrying cages, these tiny like metal boxes, and that's how you're supposed to get a monkey from one place to another. And so my coworker was trying to hold that up to one of the openings, and then to get her to go over there, because we're dealing with this bigger cage with all of these other monkeys. I literally went into this cage with all of these other monkeys. Looking back on it, again, wouldn't recommend. It's one of those things where it's like, this is my job, right? Like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And so why should I sit here and question it? And now I'm like, that is so dangerous. So fortunately, I was okay, and they were more afraid of me in that instance than, I was of them, or maybe it was equal. But it did prompt her to go into that carrying cage. And so then we brought her to what is known as a tabletop restraint, or what we would call a squeeze. Basically, it's this like metal device, and then like you can tighten it. It's got these sort of like fingers where like if you tighten it, then you are able to give a shot to a monkey without them moving around too much. So we weren't trying to like tighten it. We were just trying to like put her in a secure location where we could take the baby. And so we had the carrying cage next to this squeeze. And then in the squeeze, I was putting in one of their favorite treats, which was a marshmallow. Marshmallows aren't very good for these animals, but we were giving them whatever, when it came to medication or something, this is how we would give it to them. It might be like frosting and crackers or something. So anyway, marshmallows were a really big deal. So I was breaking off pieces of the marshmallow, and she would come out of the carrying cage still carrying her baby, take the marshmallow and go back in. And this happened a couple of times. And then eventually I put the marshmallow down again, and she came out, and this time she put her baby down. So she laid the baby down. She put her lips to the baby's head and then went back into the carrying cage without the marshmallow and without the baby. And it was like, in that instance, there was no doubt in my mind that she knew what we were doing. She knew what we had come for, and she knew it was hopeless to like keep it up. Eventually we were going to have to do something else, something more extreme, to take the baby away. And it was just heartbreaking. And my coworker then took, put her back in the carrying cage, got her back to the larger cage. And I had to put her baby into a plastic bag and into the freezer, which was not the first time or the last time that I had to put newborn babies into plastic bags in freezers. And I don't know if a lot of you remember what happened recently with that orca that had her calf die, and she was carrying that orca for so long with her, which was, she was risking her life trying to carry her dead baby with her. And everybody's fascinated. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, this orca, she cares so much about her baby. This is so sad. And it was so, and as someone who has, and I will talk about this, get to this, as someone who has PTSD, I was legitimately triggered by this, because all I could think about were these individuals in this lab whose stories were, so unknown to people, and they're going through similar things. And we think that somehow they're not. We think that somehow these animals don't care deeply for others like we do. We think that there's something that's so separate. And it was so interesting to me to see the world fascinated by this orca and her baby, and to think back to these like mothers in the lab where all the time after 6 to 12 months their baby's ripped from them. So this is a nice segue to my mental health and how this impacted me as an individual. I struggled for many years after leaving the lab, though I wasn't actually diagnosed officially with PTSD until 6 years later. I feel like there was like I kind of thought that I had it, but wasn't really doing anything about it. And one of the things that would happen a lot is I was just having nightmares all the time. I would be back in the lab, I'd be back volunteering, and I'm like, why am I here? I don't even want to be here. And it got to a point where it was just so bad that I really started to deteriorate. And so that kind of led to the diagnosis, led to me, seeking more help. And in the last few years, things have, in the last year, I would say things have gotten better. They've improved. I feel like I have more of a sort of grip on it. In this image here, this is piece of artwork once again that I worked with one of my colleagues at work, and she brought this image to life, something that I kind of had been feeling for a very long time, to like represent what it's like to be this, you know, compassionate individual that's trying to help these animals in an environment where they don't really want you to. They want you to help them to a degree, right? Keep them healthy to an extent, keep them okay for research. But, you know, you're never putting these animals' needs first, because if you were, they wouldn't be here in the first place. And so ultimately, you know, when you work in these types of environments where life is viewed as disposable, replaceable, you either have to believe it's true. I guess you can leave if you get to that point, or you dissociate. And that's what I did. I mean, I really emotionally shut down, and I know I'm not the only one, and, you know, I'll get into this a bit, but it's really hard when you care for these animals to just leave. And so I didn't. A lot of people ask, well, what made you leave? Well, what made me leave is I graduated. It was just, you know, I wasn't a student anymore. And so I wasn't taking care of them anymore. It's not that I didn't want to leave at certain points. But I was also afraid to leave because I was afraid that I would be judged. You know, there's this fear that if you speak up about anything, you'll be labeled an animal activist. You do not want to be labeled an animal activist. Like, they're not going to listen to you if you sound too much like an activist. And it's not hard to sound much like an activist. This photo on the left is actually a gift that was given to me when I left, or when I graduated. It says, "Thanks, Maddie, from all of your friends at HPL, Harlow Primate Lab." To this day, I don't know who any of these individuals are in this photo. I don't know if I took care of them. I don't know if they were alive then, if they're alive now. I mean, it's really quite haunting. And these are supposed to be like, you know, like if like these, you saw the image at the beginning of the presentation, like these are supposed to be nice images of these animals. And it's so deeply depressing. And I included this quote by Dr. John Gluck, for those of you who don't know who he is. He was a former primate researcher who actually worked at Harlow Primate Lab under Harry Harlow. He wrote this book, Voracious Science and Vulnerable Animals. I highly recommend it. One of the things he said was, "I don't think I ever escaped the monkeys' faces. I want to be reminded about how inconsiderate I could become as a human being, so devoted to my own success and losing touch with the rest of the world around me." And it's just one of those things that has spoken to me, because you can't, once you've seen these animals like this, it's with you for so long. And it's something that, you know, the industry, they don't view this work as traumatic, as inherently traumatic, when the reality is that it is, and it should be, especially for young, impressionable people. You know, college students are young. We haven't experienced that much of the world at that point. And to be put in this environment that is normalizing violence in such a way, it has lasting impacts. And I'm feeling those impacts still today. So, I left there. I knew at that point I didn't want to be doing anything like that. Not that I wanted to be doing anything like that in the first place, but I went on to work in different sanctuaries and rescue settings, as was talked about, became an animal rights and social justice activist. And part of what has come from that are 2 lawsuits. So I actually won't talk too much about these today, but there's, you know, a lot on my social media about them. And there's actually, we'll get to one of them. There was just a recent podcast that does a great deal of like detailing this one, which is my lawsuit against my university. The Animal Legal Defense Fund is representing me, and we are suing the university for censorship. Because basically what happened is I got to a point where I decided I didn't want to let fear keep me from sharing my stories. Because after I left the lab, there were still years that went by where I barely talked about it, where people had no idea what the things that I had seen or what had gone on, even my family. And so eventually, I got to a point where I was like, you know what, I'm ready to do this. And social media was kind of that place that felt right. And so I started creating posts and sharing about, Cheerio, for example. And when it got to a point where there was like kind of another step in the process, but eventually got to a point where I was like, you know what, I'm ready to call out UW-Madison. So I started tagging them in some of my posts, and immediately they started untagging themselves. And I was like, wow, that was quick. And then, I started commenting on some of their posts and would notice that.
Real quick, Maddie, may I ask how you noticed that they were untagging themselves?
Yes. So I noticed because when you tag someone and, they have certain settings, like this is a public institution. So like you can see like when someone tags them tag them in a photo, you go to their tagged photos, you can see their tagged photos. And so I would go there and I was like, wow, look at that. Cause I went through and like tagged them in several of the posts that I had done over time. Cause I was like, you know what, I'm ready. I'm ready for people to see that it's not just like, I'm not just talking about working in a lab. I'm talking about working in UW-Madison's lab. And so I had gone and taken a screenshot at that point to just show like, wow, look what I did. And so there's this screenshot showing like, on their tagged photos, the posts that I had tagged them in. And then I went back not that long later, within a couple hours, and they were gone. And so I knew they were untagging themselves. You don't get notification. It's not like, oh, UW untagged themselves from this. So then I had also started commenting on some of their posts, sharing, just things like I worked in one of their primate labs and, it's time to close them down. Nothing like super detailed really. And, some of these are available in articles that I've got links to, so won't go into detail, but basically it became clear that there were comments where I kind of expected people to respond and they weren't. And what ended up happening is I ended up reaching out to someone and was like, do you see this? And they were like, no, like your comment's not there. And so we started to realize that they were censoring my account. And being that it's a public institution, that brings the issue of free speech in. So as I said, I just recently, I'll bounce back to that, but I just recently did a podcast. I was featured on Our Hen House's animal law podcast with my lawyer, Caitlin Foley, who you see here. And this is actually really great because Caitlin goes super into detail about the law part of things that I'm less good about talking about, less great, whatever that is. So anyway, I recommend that if you want to look more into that. There's also actually a link to just straight up the what am I trying to say? The transcript. So you can actually read through it too, which is nice. But so that's good if you're wanting to kind of hear more about that. Because one of the things we also discovered when it came to this is it wasn't just me being censored. They also have censored word lists or blocked word lists, where basically on the left is Instagram, on the right is Facebook. So if you were on UW-Madison's Instagram and you're like, shame on you for testing on animals, well, you've got multiple blocked words that you just used. And so what that means is you will see your post, but no one else will. Well, aside from UW-Madison, it's automatically censored. And so what that means is a lot of times when people go to their page and express how they're feeling about what they're doing to these animals, no one else is seeing it. And you think that you've, made a statement that others can react to, but in reality, it doesn't exist. So this was a really interesting discovery that then prompted me and my friend Ryan here, who's listed as a plaintiff on the second lawsuit, to put in a FOIA request, basically Freedom of Information Act request for the NIH, where we realized that they have censored word lists too. And sure enough, there's actually other universities who do as well. And as with UW-Madison and the NIH, many of the words on the list are affiliated with animal testing. So this is actually like a bigger issue than we even thought it was, because ultimately, you know, these the government affiliated institutions are trying to censor discourse about what we're doing to these animals. So we can't even, like, as the public, comment on this without having to do something ridiculous, like, you know, start typing monkey, but with like spaces in between so that the comment isn't hidden. So it's super wild. Both of these lawsuits, just because I know you're probably wondering, are in the motions for summary judgment phase, which means we're basically waiting to hear from a judge what they think. So to be determined. Need some water, 1 second.
You're gonna take them down.
And
All
like
right.
UC Davis, I know they probably do this too. Like, let's just go one after the other if this works.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'll have to find out. I know I've asked Ryan this like 6 times, but I'm like, which schools did you do it for? Like, get the FOIA requests? Because I honestly can't remember off the top of my head. And I know some also like will be like, you have to pay a certain amount, or like will delay and like not send it to you. And so it's like hard to get them. Or not necessarily easy. And it also has to be a public school, is the thing. So like, you know, for something that's like a private organization or school, you wouldn't be able to get that information.
Yeah, I would encourage folks to also check out the update on PETA's lawsuit with the University of Washington, where now UW owes PETA like about $500,000 because of this FOIA issue, where, you know, there was a request sent in and they're like, oh crap, they want to know this information, and they destroy records. And so it was taken to court and all that. And now, and this is just one out of many suits where, you know, $500,000 is coming PETA's way. So it's just something to, I guess we should all keep in mind.
Yeah, well, and it's, I mean, it just shows it's like what you know, like, you know that what's going on some level is wrong if you think that you have to go to like, you know, take that step, delete.
There's actually a great question in the chat from Dr. Rosenberg.
Sorry, I've been kind of ignoring the chat.
Oh, no, I just saw this. It said, if University of Wisconsin is found guilty, what is their penalty?
Yeah, so that is part of what the judge decides. So I don't know yet at this point. I mean, what we would like to see is that, you know, censorship can't happen when it comes to like animal testing. So I know like that's one of the things we're asking for, but ultimately it is impacted by the judge. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, did I miss anything else? Okay. All right, I'm gonna keep going. So this is sort of the part where I kind of get to some of the conclusions that I've drawn and like kind of basically implications for changing this industry. Well, not changing this industry, I should say, like, you know, trying to stop this industry from harming animals, changing, you know, what we're doing in order to, you know, whether it's improve human lives, that kind of thing. So one of the things that, you know, I think many of us as animal activists can agree that we're at this point that, you know, society is so desensitized to violence that people don't really hesitate to defend animal research. Something that is so cruel that if you were to actually sit a child down and be like, this is what's happening, they'd be like, what? They'd be horrified. But this is the reality. I mean, people are like, well, how else would I do this? How else would we do that? And, you know, I think that it's pretty remarkable that someone doesn't just go like, I mean, yeah, it is pretty bad. But one of the things the industry does is do a really good job of sort of making, you know, animal activists in general sound like they don't know what they're talking about, or that they're exaggerating. They also do a really good job of being like, look at all of these regulations that we have to follow. And those regulations are silly, to say the least. I mean, like one of, like, for an example, like, you know, when it comes to, I believe it's the Animal Welfare Act that says that like primates and specifically need to be housed socially because they're really social animals and it's important for their well-being. But all a researcher has to do is be like, it would be important for my study for the animal to not be housed socially and to be housed alone forever. And it's like, cool, sounds good. Like, this is what they're dealing with. So, you know, it's great that they can point to all these regulations, but if you actually take the time to go through them, you realize that they're not impressive. Another thing, as with other animal rights issues, the exploitation of animals in labs does not just harm animals. I was kind of getting into this before, you know, when it comes to those of us who have worked in, you know, whether it's labs or, you know, in other places that exploit animals, it is harmful for humans to be exposed to this. You know, some people get so desensitized that they're just sort of like past, you know, seemingly caring, which is really hard. But a lot of us are just sort of like trying to figure out how to survive in this situation. And as I said, you know, these labs are inherently traumatic. And I would argue that like students should be, especially students, but in general, lab workers working with animals in research should be there should be like mandatory like check-ins with psychologists that are not hired by the lab, but like, you know, some sort of like entity that is unbiased or as unbiased as possible. So let me see, I had written something here and I'm just, yeah, I mean, I think one of the realizations that I had when I was making those posts and how quickly they were sort of like untagging themselves was that it showed me how powerful what I was doing was. I honestly don't know what would have happened had they not reacted the way they did, because it showed me that what I was sharing was a problem for them. And so that realization kind of led me to this realization that there's a lot of us out of there. There's a lot more people who have worked in animal research labs like alone and just like animal exploitation in general than we think. And our voices are very powerful, but the lab does a really good job of kind of like getting you to just kind of leave and stay quiet. A lot of people are afraid, like I was, that they're going to be retaliated against. And I think that's one thing that keeps people quiet. A lot of times people also just don't have the resources to deal with what they are going through. And then it's even harder to like say, I'm going to start speaking out when I haven't even figured out how to deal with what has happened. And so there's a lot of different forces. Another thing, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, is the reaction of, in this case, animal rights activists, and how some of them react to people like me who have been in these situations of exploitation, of partaking in that exploitation, and then are criticized, even though we're trying to make a change.
Maddie, also real quick, I know I said questions at the end, but I think it's just relevant given the timing of the mental health conversation. We have a great question about the do you think mental health experts aren't given to students because they may think for themselves? And I know that the accessibility to mental health resources could vary from university to university.
Do you think, hold on, sorry, do you
Yeah.
think mental health? Wait, because the students are, who's they? Because they may think for themselves.
I'm guessing it's the university. And Ismail, if you want to unmute yourself, go for it.
Can you hear me good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I come from a university, I come from UIC, Public Research University, and I've definitely talked to a lot of people who've done animal testing, and I feel like they don't really I guess think about it, or at least challenge the morality of it, because they don't really question it themselves. I feel like they're just following each other. And I know that like therapists, I guess like the thing about therapists is you talk about it, and you talk about like all aspects of it, right? So if the universities aren't giving these experts, therapists, to these students, it's kind of like more of a nudge to like follow the line, instead of like thinking about the morality, thinking about it holistically.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, this environment, the universities, I mean, the research labs, yes, but the universities stand to lose a lot if people were able to start to really think about what's going on and address it. This isn't just about like the research labs, like UW-Madison, for example, the university that I was at. They get so much funding from the research that's taking place on these animals. So it's not even in their best interest for students to, be supported in that way. So the incentive is really not there unless it was demanded in some way. I mean, it's the incentive at these institutions is to, what is the word or the phrase I'm looking for? Keep keep doing whatever we're doing, not try to change things. So, and there's definitely that pressure within that community. I mean, so another an example is that after I started speaking out on social media, one of my former coworkers reached out to me and expressed, well, the first thing she had said was something along the lines of like, I'm really sorry for what you're experiencing. I'm here if you ever want to talk. And I was just like, what? Because we never talked. Like the caretakers, we were caretakers. We weren't even in the research. None of us ever talked about our feelings about any of this. Okay. So I had no idea that there was another individual there who was struggling in a way similar to me. And, that just shows we are not in an environment that's encouraging us to have empathy for these animals, to express too strong of compassion for them. And she ended up, sharing a bit of her story after she saw me do the same. But it is just, it's not an environment where we're encouraged to do that. I've had individuals actually find me through social media now. This is what one of them had written. I also developed PTSD, OCD after resigning from, and then I removed the name of the lab, and was in huge denial about it until recently. Reading this, she was responding to something that I had posted. Reading this makes me feel so much better since it confirms the toxicity and stress that type of research environment can breed. It takes a lot of energy and strength to share a story like this. Just a reminder that everyone we meet is fighting something we know nothing about. So just be kind. Another former primate lab worker, working in a lab was a nightmare from which 10 years later, I'm still recovering. Labs don't want you to know what I know, saw, felt, and still feel. They do not want to address the pain and suffering they cause. They are afraid to acknowledge that they've built a system that allows them to do horrible things to animals without repercussions. They cause unimaginable suffering because there are no suitable laws or regulations in place to protect those whose voices are deliberately suppressed. You deserve to know the truth. And this was an excerpt from an article that they had shared. So, you know, the conclusion here, the animal research industry is most threatened by lab workers. You know, we are the ones that have been inside, we have seen, we've been a part of it. We're not proud of it. None of us are proud of it. I am not proud of it. I mean, so, okay, some lab workers may be proud of it, but maybe they're not at this point where they're, you know, trying to expose what's wrong. But I'm saying if any of us are speaking up about what's going on and trying to stop that, we're not doing it because we are proud of it and want attention. We are doing it because it feels like the right thing to do. And this industry, this is what scares them the most, you know, because they, you know, it is so secretive. They do a really good job of that. So this is just one of many reasons why it makes sense to be building these alliances and to be trying to be empathetic with people who are coming from industries that exploit animals, whether it's animal research or, you know, I don't know, circuses, zoos, the food, animal agriculture. We need to start setting a precedent when it comes to social circles, organizations, on how to better align ourselves with, like, trying to figure out the best way to say this, because, you know, I think a lot of people, when it comes to like the thought of like empathizing with someone who has been involved in something like this, is like, you know, this is horrible. How could I ever do that? And the reality is you can empathize with someone without supporting their choices or supporting what they've done in the past or what they're doing. You can still try to, you know, you can still care about them and realize that things are complicated. They're not as straightforward as people want to, you know, claim this is, that it's just like, Maddie, why didn't you just leave? Well, guess what? I cared about those monkeys. And most people who are working in labs with animals, especially as the caretakers, got involved because they care about the animals and then they feel stuck. It's just, it is the reality. So this kind of brings me to this conclusion about how the language we use matters. And if you've been following me on social media, you've heard me go on tangents about this. The comments that come from the animal rights activists and like vegan circles that are said about people who work in labs or have worked in labs is outrageous. I mean, it's unacceptable for many reasons, because I just think it's unacceptable to talk to anyone like this. We are supposed to be compassionate people who are trying to make the world a more just place. I understand being angry. I understand being angry about this, like, to a degree that I can't even, you know, like fully explain. So like using anger about this as like an excuse to say, you know, what you're seeing on the screen here, you know, F every single one of them, like, what does this do? What does this do for the animals? Does this liberate animals? I mean, seriously, there is no punishment great enough for all these people. Why is this allowed? These humans need the death penalty. I mean, it's seriously these, and I mean, I had so many to pull from. It's ridiculous. Some of these things, this was said directly to me. Stop lecturing people and stop using vegan hashtags. You're wasting my time. I think you really support this industry. This was on a post where I was actually, it was labeled demonizing animal lab workers won't liberate animals. Because that's the reality, it won't. This is a common sentiment coming from activists, which is that some people just know better, and those of you who don't, you know, screw you. So this says animal liberation activists who have always known better and never would have allowed themselves to be indoctrinated and institutionalized or ever sold out to these evil industries will never be as cruel and unreasonable as those who have and do. Animal lab workers can cry me a river. They're sellouts and are going to have to pay for their choices, as all choices have consequences. They better learn to make better and wiser ones that serve the greater good of all, if they're at all concerned about anything other than their measly human existence and their paychecks. So, I mean, I put these out here because do you think that people who work in animal research labs and are considering speaking out would really be encouraged to do so when this is the community that they would probably be entering, right? Like they're going against this industry that's already saying like, don't talk, don't talk, don't talk. And then this is what they're being met with. It's truly outrageous. And it's just this kind of thing where it's like, you're trying to like police people and expect perfection from the very start. None of us are perfect. We live in an imperfect world. You can't be perfect. So I really like encourage people within their circles, as well as whatever organizations they work with. If you are wanting to see an end to animal testing, you know, one of the things to do is to uplift the voices of people who can share what is going on. And two is to not demonize workers, to not use language that one of us is going to read and go like, you know, there are times where I have been like, yeah, I felt like a monster, but I don't need all of you saying like, you're such a monster. Like, how did you do that? Or, you know, like that's not productive. And I promise it's not helping animals. If anything, it is exactly what the industry, the animal research labs want you to do, because that is encouraging workers who leave and might be questioning it to stay quiet. It's saying, and it's also just showing like, look at how ridiculous animal rights activists sound. Like they're telling us that we deserve the death penalty. Okay, so like if you want to stop this industry, stop adding fuel to their fire, you know? And that brings us to, you know, as much as I'm like, you know, animals deserve better, they don't deserve to be treated this way. I think we also need to look at the issue of animal research as what it is. And it's a social justice, human rights, public health issue. We are wasting billions of dollars on this testing. You know, there's like this claim that it's benefiting humans, right? But we know that we could benefit humans much more right now if we simply invested it back into communities. Here's kind of an example. Government here in the US, we are spending about $14 to $16 billion per year on animal experimentation. That is a ridiculous amount. Imagine for a second what would be, you know, what this world would look like if those billions were spent on homes for the houseless, ensuring that everyone actually has access to healthcare, health insurance, therapy, medications, all of these things that already exist, you know, instead of testing on the animals to try to create more of, you know, things we're not going to come up with. Food justice, hunger relief, supporting teachers in our schools, community care projects. We know that like investing in our communities is ultimately what's going to help. And yet, you know, this money continues to be funneled to testing on animals. You know, so when, I guess what I'm saying is when, you know, this industry continues to say that animal rights activists don't care about humans. I mean, some maybe don't, but I do. I care very deeply about humans. And there's nothing that like gets me more worked up right now than how much we are spending, you know, on animal testing when so many people who just need therapy can't pay for a therapist, can't access medication that already exists. It's truly outrageous. A while back, I just did this like kind of just to show what this looks like in terms of the funding. So this was the screenshot you're seeing at the bottom. One of the research studies that's taking place at UW-Madison, they got like basically $3.5 million to induce extreme anxiety or to study extreme anxiety in females, which equated to inducing extreme anxiety into female monkeys. So like, let's just like stress female monkeys out even more than they already are in the environment that they're in. So I was just like, okay, well, like what could this money do if it wasn't spent, you know, what could it do for like, you know, women who have anxiety? Okay. So like I found out that like let's say you're seeing a therapist once a week, 52 weeks. Let's just say that it's $100 per week. Obviously this varies greatly depending on where you are, but we're just going to stick with that. So that's $5,200. Divide that, you know, into that 3.5 million. You've got 670 women with anxiety who now have therapy for an entire year once a week. Okay, like that is not to be minimized. Okay, like I know what therapy did for me. It saved me. So I know that I'm not the only one. So it's just absurd to me that that money is being spent to, in this case, literally torture monkeys. So wrapping up here, something else that I think is an important takeaway that I know is controversial is that an alternative to testing on animals is not testing on animals. You know, like we just don't need to actually be doing this. Deciding that another species is less intelligent or less sentient than the human species is inherently flawed and unscientific, as we can only truly understand the human perspective. A fish, a mouse, a chicken, a dog, a monkey, they're all intelligent and sentient beings based on their own species needs. They aren't humans. They have other, you know, perspectives, other reasons to be the way they are. So exploiting another species isn't about humans scientifically deserving greater moral consideration. It's about creating digestible but poor excuses for why human pleasure and human life are valued more than the interests of other species. So therefore, we humans disregard the interests of another species simply because we consider our viewpoint of their worth scientifically and biologically accurate, when in fact, our perspective can never truly be objective. If we're truly being honest with ourselves, we exploit and kill other species, not because they are scientifically lesser than, but because we can. They simply cannot fight back. That is what I've got. So my email is here. My Instagram is here, which also has like my link tree, which has lots of articles. That's where you'll find our hen house. I can also put like some links in there, but yeah, I'm reachable and I'm happy to now answer questions. Hopefully I didn't bore you.
No, that was awesome. Thank you so much for that talk. That's so amazing. I'm, you know, struggling with our honor right now, trying to get students who are currently in the system and who are in labs right now who reach out to me privately because they see horrible things, their school's doing horrible things, but they don't even want our honor to write a letter to the dean. They're so scared. They don't even want to like send me a copy of their syllabus because they're so scared.
Yeah.
It's told I'm not supposed to share the syllabus. And like, please just wait until I'm graduated, you know, from vet school or from school or whatever, until I get into vet school, and then I'll talk to you. But until then, like I want to tell you these things, but please keep it quiet. So I have all these stories in my head of horrible things that students are going through and seeing, and they're not willing to speak out about it. They're not even willing to speak to other students about it. They trust me, but they don't trust, oh, the student who might be in this WhatsApp chat or whatever. They don't even trust each other with this information. It's so sad. So do you have any advice for how we can empower students to start to speak out and realize they're not alone?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, to me, like I know, and I guess I didn't even really completely touch on this, but you know, one of the reasons that I started speaking out was I read Dr. Gluck's book. Gosh, what was it? Like 2016, 20. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, but it was basically like 2016. And I remember at the time, like drafting this email to him and then never sending it because I didn't know like really what to say. And it was like a couple years later, after I was sort of meeting some other people who were supportive, that I met him. And when I met him, it was like, I finally kind of had that confidence to like share my story, to talk to someone who really understood and saw where I was coming from, because it's, you know, I think it's so important that even people who have not been through this situation are supportive and compassionate, but it also means so much for people to be able to talk to people who have been through it or are going through it and know what that's like. And hearing even from one person can then, you know, start to get other people talking. I've noticed that myself. I mean, it's been really amazing, the messages that I get through social media about this. And I guess I'm just like, you know, one of the things that's so hard is like, you know, being that one person that's ready to sort of to speak up so that others do, right? Because I think the second one person does it, then everyone else starts to sort of chime in, right? Like then it's like, it's not as scary. I mean, I'm always happy to try to, you know, encourage them. I think that fear is real. I mean, I didn't know what was going to happen when I started speaking out against UW. I didn't know what was going to happen when we filed the lawsuit. You know, like I was like, what is going on here? And that fear is real, because you don't really know what people have signed or what could really happen. So, you know, I don't know that I have the best answer, other than I do think even if they're not immediately connecting with each other, if they're connecting with someone like you and, you know, others who they feel safe with, that can help foster sort of, or create like an environment where eventually they are going to like get to a point where they're like, okay, I'm ready. I feel safe. I feel like there is sort of this support system behind me, even if, you know, even if it's not the students in my immediate vicinity. But I also think that at like schools like this, if animal rights activists, who have like clubs or whatever can, you know, be a support system and can not make them feel a certain way about what they're doing, that could have a huge impact, right? Like just having people who are like, yeah, I'll listen to you. And so that kind of goes like ties into trying to get more, you know, animal activists in general to just think a bit differently about like how we might connect with these individuals and really genuinely build relationships with them. Because I think it's about a support system. I mean, that's ultimately it. The more supported we feel, the more we feel like, you know, we can do this. We can step out and say, I've got something to say. But clearly right now in these schools, that support system does not exist, which is really sad and not uncommon. But I think it's something that needs to be further talked about and brainstormed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I just think of, I was mentioning this book, Achilles in Vietnam by Jonathan Shea. And in it, he says, basically, if you think that if you were put in that same situation and you would behave differently or you wouldn't choose the path of working in this lab, et cetera, then you're either saying one of two things. Either you are somehow better than that person or they are somehow inherently flawed.
Right.
And what are the implications for both of those attitudes?
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying you're better than that person? Okay, if so, now what are you going to do with that information?
Right.
Now, how does that change the world?
Therefore,
yeah. Okay, great. Congratulations. You're a better person than they are. Or, you know, they're somehow flawed. Okay, so they're flawed. Now what? So I just like I mean, we've all been there where, you know, even think of something else, like maybe you didn't recycle as well as you do now, or, you know, something like that, something that you don't do as perfectly. Yeah. Like we all understand that feeling of like, I know I should be doing better, but I'm not. Or, you know, there's just too much pressure. I just need that letter of recommendation from that researcher. I need my hours doing research for my application. And then after, I can go to vet school and actually save animals. But for now, I'm just going to keep my head down and this.
And that's unfortunately the thought process for so many. And it's, you know, and it's like when you get that sort of like one track mind of like, you know, I I'm vegan and therefore like I'm perfect or something. It's like, well, you know, I'm sure if we actually wanted to sit down and talk about like, you know, how you live your life, we could find some areas that are not perfect, right? Like a lot of vegans don't realize that like, you know, plant-based agricultural workers just experience like, you know, horrible pay, horrible conditions, like, you know, veganism is not cruelty free, right? So I just think that like we all have to realize that we live in an imperfect world. People are doing what they can, and that doesn't mean that, you know, things can't improve, but we need to support each other and we need to do our best to not be passing so much judgment.
Yeah, absolutely. What about the idea of, you know, there's this huge problem of no vegans or animal rights activists are actually going into these professions into laboratory animal medicine. Like we are going to need some people on the inside to help scale down the system and to be kind of an advocate on the inside for change. But nobody's willing to do that. So all of these facilities just kind of become really toxic environments where like all the compassionate voices aren't even a part of the conversation. So their labs are this bubble, their own like extremism.
Yeah.
And they're not getting our voices. And this is the same thing with the veterinary profession. No vegans are becoming veterinarian. Well, there are a few, but not at the amount of that we need. And so many people, you know, why aren't there any vegan vets? It's like, do you know any vegans who would go to vet school? Everybody's like, no, I don't want to euthanize animals, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, what do you think about vegans, animal rights activists actually becoming lab animal workers? Is that possible, or is that just too?
Yeah. I mean, obviously it depends on the individual. Like I know at this point, like I think it, you know, it depends on the situation and where you're at. Like if I was to try to end up back in a situation like that, I would just lose my mind. But, you know, I had a conversation recently, and if that individual wants to speak out, they can. But where I was talking to someone who had just come from a primate research lab and was talking about how, do you want to talk?
Yeah, sure. Called out. Yeah, so I did actually become vegan in my undergrad while doing animal science in very ag heavy. And then wanted to go to grad school to study animal behavior and animal welfare, and found a primate lab while I was vegan that did animal emotion. So in my head, I was like, oh, I can get into this exploitative industry. Like I knew biomedical primate research was not going to be a good place for these monkeys. But in my head, I was like, I'm vegan and I'm interested in animal welfare, and these monkeys are here regardless. So someone's got to get in there and do the work. But yeah, I went in there and tried to do the work, but really, like Maddie was saying, same stuff. These monkeys in cages and welfare always comes second. And yeah, I do still think it's very important, like you're saying, Crystal, that there needs to be more vegans, vegan animal scientists and vegan vets and vegans in these industries that are trying to change things from the inside, because like Maddie was saying too, it's easy for people on the inside of these primate centers to say, oh, those crazy animal activists, they're just wild, you know, they're out of line, they're crazy. And I heard that firsthand, jokes about PETA, oh, don't let PETA see this, you know, those animal activists. And I'm sitting right there. I'm not saying anything because it doesn't do me any good but it's just like, I'm in here and I'm trying to make a change. Yeah, so I hope this is the future, that more animal scientists start to become vegan, but it really does require vegans to be more accepting of animal scientists. I don't know, it's a balance, because I study animal welfare, which is really easy to connect to animal rights and to the betterment of animal well-being. So, but it might be harder to be an actual scientist that wants to do other research with animals while also being vegan. So.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, I mean, I think that like it would be great to get more people on the inside, but it's like, can you handle it, right? I mean, and it's just like in that environment when people are like trying so hard to keep you from thinking too deeply about what's going on or too compassionately about these animals, it's hard. I think just like more conversations that are being able to have more conversations that are open like this about individuals or with individuals coming from these areas would be helpful. I think it's just like, yeah, somehow if we can start to open these conversations and not kind of be this scary thing that for the people in the lab, you know, like I don't remember a lot, but I also remember when even then, which was like now 10 years ago, like, oh, there's some PETA activists outside and like, just keep your head down and like go inside, you know, like they didn't have to say a lot for us to be like, yeah, they're unreasonable, right? Like these animal activists. And then it's like, all of a sudden we're like, you know, if you're in there and you're like, maybe this is wrong, but like they're unreasonable. So what does that make me? I just think we have to keep having conversations and try to like help people who are in labs or in these situations be open to that, and also have ourselves be more open to like the nuance of all of this. You know, it's when someone's working in like a place of exploitation, it's not necessarily because they support that. You know, sometimes people are really trying to make a difference from the inside, and it's really hard to do, but doesn't need to be impossible. It doesn't, I mean, it's got to be possible somehow. We've had good things happen.
Oh yeah, I think like maybe protesters should leaflet resources to people who are walking into the building, like, hey, do you work here? We'll help you.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's just a thought, but yeah, there's just so much here. I think there was, do you know where things are getting on non-animal methods adopted? Yeah, so just curious as to your thoughts on where these animal-free, more human-relevant methods are being adopted and implemented, and outside of any sort of care that's related to, you know, non-human beings and more related to human medical care.
Yeah. So I personally like don't have the specifics on that. However, I know there's a lot of like really great organizations that do, like the Center for Contemporary Sciences. There's that Canadian-based organization. It's like
things like Canadian, some Center for Alternatives, something. I'll post all of that in the chat so folks
can, because that's where I would go. Like, the specifics of that are not my strong point, but I know that, you know, it's happening. There's a lot of different places working on alternatives for different reasons.
I like to call them upgrades to
upgrades. Truly, it's like it shouldn't be considered an alternative. I mean, you're testing on animals that are in an inherently stressful environment, and you're supposed to act like this is a control. Like these animals are just, you know, like they're literally living in a state of stress. Like that is just like the baseline. So it's, you know, and the other thing I just think it's important to think about is that like, we are actually a very intelligent species when we want to be. And so it's kind of like ridiculous that we don't think we're smart enough to come up with other ways to do these things. I mean, really, like we've done so much as like the human species. Why is it that we still think that this is the best way to do this? But, you know, then that gets into this whole thing. It's like, is it really about that, or is it about publishing and making money off of these papers? Because the reality is again, if we wanted to help all of these people who, you know, need access to mental health care or housing, like we could just redistribute funds, but maybe those aren't the people that the humans that they're trying to help, right? It's not about that. And so there's all these different parts that I think are impacting each other, but they're all things to consider, that it's not, again, it's sort of like animal agriculture. It's not just an issue because of how animals are treated. It is detrimental to the planet, the humans involved in this industry, or impacted by it. So I think it's important to like think big picture too, and to help people make those connections, because they're not obvious, and the industry doesn't want you to see them as obvious. They don't want you to say like, what could I do with this like $28 million that might be more beneficial than, you know.
I mean, you could give us a little bit.
I could use some.
I know, just a little bit. Yeah, like you've addressed all of the main things that we wanted to touch on. I do have one question as far as your visions and like what you would like, what precedent you would like to set as far as the lawsuits go. But before that, we have an even more important question. Where'd you get the pig pillow?
It is from Farm Sanctuary.
Okay, someone out. Yes. Sanctuary. Yeah, so check out Farm Sanctuary and
check out Farm Sanctuary's gift shop. It is from a few years ago, but I believe there's now a cow pillow that's like similar. So if it's still in the gift shop, I don't know.
But yeah.
Okay, wait. So what was your
we'll just wrap up with that. What precedent you hope to set as far as this lawsuit goes? That's my last question, but if anyone else has, we can.
Yeah. I mean, like I guess my dream for like these free speech lawsuits would really be that it's no longer acceptable to suppress discourse about animal testing. I think that if the public is actually allowed to openly discuss, you know, the issue of animal testing, and by openly, I mean, they don't post something and then no one else can see it, but that they post something and someone else can respond, and that like, you know, the NIH or UW-Madison or whoever it is, you know, they either have to respond or they have to just leave the conversation to take place. I think that would have major implications, because, you know, I think it's sort of like, if that isn't taking place, it seems like people don't really care about the issue. And that's not the case. We know that's not the case. Animal research is one of the like most controversial you know, industries at this point. People feel really strong. People who are not vegan feel really strongly about what is happening. We saw what took place when, you know, that research came out about the beagles. And so I hope that open conversation can take place and that it's no longer going to be suppressed, because I think that is going to have a snowball effect then, in terms of what, like, us being able to hold the government, these institutions accountable for what they're doing.
I love it.
Love it. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so Crystal, well, if there's anything else we gotta do, we can do that, or we can call it a really great night.
Yeah, I encourage you all to come to our FOIA talk on Saturday, because that'll be super fascinating. We've gotten a lot of information by doing FOIA requests, so we'll teach you how to do your own FOIA requests. If you are an animal advocate, FOIAing your name is like one way to start, see what the industry is saying about you. Let's see. Oh, have we FOIA'd Maddie Krasno yet? Like, oh, you have freaking attorneys. So yeah, you got the ALD.
Yeah, you can get those docs anytime.
Yeah.
But
like I saw a comment. Ismail, like, love that is specifically for public universities. Absolutely, public universities, FOIA them, and you can find all the behind the scenes. And yes, the link for the FOIA talk will also be sent out and will be
I
posted.
think you should be able to go to
Yes.
the org/events, and then you'll see the link to that with Jeremy Beckham, who is always a great speaker. So yeah, come to that. And I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll post this on YouTube, I guess, after. So watch for that, and sign up for our honors email list too, and follow us on social media so that you can see all of our updates.
We
Our
want to have more events like this where we talk more about community building and trying to forge these quote unquote unconventional relationships. When you actually think about it, it's not, because just based off of Maddie's story, I'm like, yeah, I get that. And you want to stick around because you feel like no one else is going to do it with as much of care and concern as you do. And that is a very important thing to get across to the community, and how we as a group of activists and advocates for a kinder, fairer world should keep in mind. So I really appreciate your time.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right, y'all.
All right. Have a good, depending on your time zone, good night. Good Take care, everyone.
All right, see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.